IndyCar Series on IndyCar Radio.
And history is matched as the twin checkered flags come out for our second four-time winner of the Indianapolis 500, Al Unser. Roberto Guerrero comes across the line, finishing 4.4 seconds back. The Penske team scores another victory. Al Unser has won the Indianapolis 500-mile race.
A.J. Foyt now coming down to the white line in turn number 2. He looks kind of happy as he goes through 2 onto the backstretch, and in just a second he'll be up to Chuck Marlowe on his final lap.
Rajar Howdy, and he has the backstretch all to himself. Here he comes, A.J. Foyt, number 1, entering up toward that northeast turn. The big wave to all the fans. He's in the northeast, and Mikey Hurt.
We got him here. People waving their hands, waving to him, and he waves back as he takes the turn number 3. One more turn to go to Jim Shelton.
And he's in this turn right now. White car, big gold number 1, happy A.J. There you have what looks like our winner, and I don't think he can miss now. He has about half a straightaway to go, and here's Sid Collins.
Well, nothing should happen now, and here comes the car, the Sheraton Thompson Special, the checkered flag for A.J. Foyt. With the right hand up in the air, waving to the crowd, the winner of the 1964 500-mile race.
And there the checkered flags waving, and Mario Rose is the winner. Rose is the winner of the 31st running of the Indianapolis 500-mile Motor Speedway Classic.
IndyCar Radio on the IMS Radio Network. From the Firestone broadcast booth, it's time for the Verizon IndyCar Series on the Advance Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
Welcome to Detroit, Belle Isle. We wish we had better news weather-wise, but we think as this day progresses, conditions will continue to improve. I guess they would have to. Over the last 24 hours, I don't know in terms of moisture that things could be much worse. I'm Mark Janes, happy to have you with us this morning as we prepare to go qualifying for race number 2 of the duel in Detroit, joined by Nick Yeoman and Jake Query here in the broadcast booth. And Nick Yeoman, I guess the good news is we're actually, courtesy of our video screens here, that we are seeing drivers on pit road being strapped into the cockpits of their race cars. So we believe something is going to happen very, very soon.
This is the plan, and at 11:30, in about 10 minutes, IndyCar qualifying will start. It's kind of a different formula or format from what we're used to. It is 2 groups. Basically, the field is split in half. Each group will get 20 minutes with 5 minutes guaranteed of green time per session. Then, of course, the fastest car out of those 2 sessions will win the pole, and the drivers in their group will start first, third, fifth, seventh, so on and so forth. But the good news is, as you mentioned, Mark, we can see Ryan Hunter-Ray for those watching on IndyCar.com. He's strapped into that race car. The good news, Jake Query, we are going to get qualifying underway, but the theme of today is going to be a soggy one.
You know, there's obviously a ton of moisture on this track. It's been raining here in the Detroit area essentially since yesterday afternoon, with some periods where it has slowed down, but at very least a sprinkle. But the word is that there's not a lot of standing water. My understanding is turn 3, there's about an inch deep in certain areas. But I noticed yesterday in between turns 5 and 6 here, some of the areas where there's standing water a little bit outside of the groove. So if you can stay in the driver's, if you will, the middle lane, for lack of a better term, you may be okay. But, Mark, the thing that's going to be interesting to see, not only in these qualifying sessions but also in the race itself, is just how many consecutive clean green flag laps we get, because everybody is now in this particular situation today. I can't imagine anybody at any point is going to be on anything other than the wet tires. We did see yesterday during the race where people tried to gamble with that. Charlie Kimball, one of the first to stay out for an extended period of time on the Reds, and you saw that he ended up getting off course. So it's going to be an interesting scenario today, whether or not we get long stints of green flag racing. I just think it's going to be one that's going to be very, very challenging depending on who decides to push it, when they decide to push it, and how long they decide to do so.
Interesting to note, Nick, that for the second time this season, if you go back to the race at New Orleans, somewhat of an unlikely winner, I think, and it was the right pit strategy at the right time, which led to Carlos Munoz picking up the first win of his career. And I'm certainly not a coach, but I don't know that I would have agreed with his sentiment. This is not the way I wanted to win it. You never apologize for winning under almost any circumstance.
Yeah, that's what he told our Kevin Lee yesterday. It's not necessarily how I want to win it, but certainly for that crew with Ziggy Harkis as the race strategist, they've been working awfully hard, and you take them how you can get them. Certainly, what a big day yesterday for Honda to put two on the podium with Carlos Munoz and Marco Andretti right here in Chevrolet's backyard. That's awfully big. It was an unconventional race. It was certainly bizarre. I know Kevin, Michael Young, and I had a great time following all the strategies down on pit lane with guys jumping on the wet tires, trying to put on the slicks. It was a lot of fun and certainly a big win for that young man, Carlos.
Guy yesterday didn't do a lot to get himself on any Christmas card lists. Stefano Coletti, a move that he made, questionable at best, took out a couple of contenders in Tony Kanaan and Graham Rahal, and the ongoing saga that began rather innocently enough at Indianapolis seems to have continued between Sage Karam and Takuma Sato.
Yeah, Takuma Sato certainly had a fast race car yesterday, a race-winning race car yesterday. Kind of got buried mid-pack due to some pit stop strategy and was trying to fight his way through the field. And trying to get around that number 8 Chevrolet of Sage Karam proved to be awfully tough. Karam threw multiple blocks on Takuma Sato. Sato was not happy about it, and it was obvious to everyone yesterday that was certainly payback from what we saw a week ago.
Jake, you're the co-host of a radio show on 1260 WNDE in Indianapolis, Indiana. You guys, you and your sidekick Derek Schultz, have touched on this. Other stations in town that have talk shows have touched on this as well. So let's touch on it now from the IndyCar radio perspective. If that quote-unquote rivalry builds, is that good for the sport or not?
Absolutely. I think it's funny, Mark, I was just looking earlier this morning, and somebody had sent out on Twitter a picture of some race fan talking about how, what he would do if he found out his brother was a fan of either of the Busch brothers in NASCAR. You have to have, not half, but I think it certainly helps in any sport. You look at any sport, whether it be in basketball, football, baseball, having a villain, having somebody that people can rally behind as the black hat, if you will, somebody that you look at and you watch. Maybe you're not watching wanting to see someone do well, but you are watching nonetheless, paying attention nonetheless. Not to say that a rivalry between Sage Karam and Takuma Sato would ultimately make someone a bad guy and somebody a good guy, but it becomes compelling and it becomes something that people talk about. Mark, I mean, you make the point. We talked about it in the Indy 500 over the course of this week. And you have Dario Franchitti, a 3-time Indy 500 winner who's working with Sage Karam, who comes out and says, look, I'm not saying that wasn't a block, but let's get consistency in the rules. And you start getting conversation, and then suddenly it just gets people talking. I think anytime you give people something to talk about, it is a positive. Obviously, you don't want it necessarily to always be some sort of a question of a series or of rules or whatever else. But when you talk about two drivers going head-to-head, going back and forth, now you're intrigued. Now people are intrigued to see what happens should they get beside one another in this particular race today.
And I'm not saying this was a long ago, but I suppose in open wheel racing, the last person who openly embraced the quote-unquote black hat role and had people either love him or hate him, those who loved him really loved him, those who hated him really hated him, was probably Paul Tracy.
Yeah, I would agree it was Paul Tracy. And, of course, again, it goes back to you look at the controversy at the Indianapolis 500 with Paul Tracy in 2002 with Castroneves, and Castroneves was the likable, fun guy, and then you had Tracy that kept standing by his ground and refused to really ever admit, for a while there he had a Borg Warner trophy on his website, so, yeah, absolutely. I think Tracy got it, Mark. I think Paul Tracy understood that if people were talking about how they didn't like Paul Tracy, the important thing is people were talking about Paul Tracy.
Nick Yeoman, was it difficult at all to get a handle on exactly what the strategy was when you were working pit road yesterday because of how disjointed the weather made things?
Mark, it wasn't only difficult for all of us on pit lane. I think it was difficult for the drivers. I talked to Mike Hull yesterday after the race, and he said, boy, the toughest thing about some of the calls we made was convincing convincing Scott Dixon that it was the right call, and ultimately they ended up with a top 5 finish. It was very disjointed. I mean, we had different drivers, numerous different strategies, but yeah, it was awfully interesting. It's going to be challenging today because with the weather conditions, I think we expect similar strategy, but certainly it's going to be awfully interesting to see who can hit it and who nails it.
From the Firestone broadcast booth, this is the Advanced Auto Parts Radio Network. When we come back, we'll continue preparations for qualifying for the duel in Detroit.
If there's one thing Firestone's learned over its 100 years in racing, it's that if you don't keep moving forward, you're going to get left behind. So even though Firestone has more Indy 500 wins than any other tire on the planet, we're always more concerned with what we've done for you lately. That's why we're constantly trying to make our tires stronger, last longer, and handle better than ever. And we bring that same commitment to every tire we make, whether it's for the racetrack or for the open road. Whatever you drive a Firestone.
Welcome back to Belle Isle in Detroit. Mark James, Jake Query, Nick Yeoman ready to go qualifying. We were given the 2-minute warning, added on top of that by a 2-minute warning. So we think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 3.5, 4, something. But the cars continue to sit on pit road. And let's face it, as frustrating and as aggravating as it is, yes, we have Firestone wets. But bottom line is, visibility is an issue. A wet racetrack they can run on. Simply put, you can't run easily or safely through standing water or water that happens to be running across the racetrack. And Nick, as we look at our multi-screen monitor here, of course, Bud Denker, Roger Penske, Charles Burns, they've talked about it throughout the course of the weekend, the improvements that have been made that have enhanced the drainage here. And I would have to say, for the most part, it looks like a job very well done because we've got a ton of rain here. 1.5 inches of rain since about this time yesterday.
Yeah, and from all the shots that we can see, it doesn't appear that there is much standing water at all. And I think it's important for a lot of the fans to understand yesterday's decision towards the end of the race. When I talked to Juan Montoya, he was very critical, saying, I don't know what IndyCar's thinking. We can run in this stuff. The issue was lightning in the area, and I think we've kind of had to reevaluate this entire situation. Remember, there was an awful situation at Pocono a couple years ago during a NASCAR race where there was a lightning strike out in a parking lot and a fan was killed. So I think that's why IndyCar has to err on the side of precaution. As for the racetrack today, the severe weather is not in the area, and that's why, Mark, we're starting to see some race cars roll out on the track.
Those extra 2 minutes have evaporated rather quickly as we see cars now making their way around the circuit. Nick, check timing and scoring. Give us an idea again who's in this first group.
Yeah, the first group is made up of drivers Sage Karam, Simon Pagenaud, Stefano Coletti, Scott Dixon, Juan Montoya, Jack Hawksworth, Joseph Newgarden, James Jakes, Rodolfo Gonzalez, Ryan Hunter-Reay, and yesterday's winner, Carlos Munoz.
You know, Jake, it wasn't that long ago when we first developed this format. You would look at how the pairings were set up between the two groups of qualifying, and you could point to one as being stacked and one as maybe being a little easier to make your way through. I just don't think that's the case anymore, and that speaks to the depth of talent that we have in our paddock.
Yeah, I agree with that. And in addition to that, you know, when they do knockout qualifying, that was the first thing we'd always look at. Hey, look at so-and-so really got an advantage by being in the second group as opposed to the first and getting knocked out. But right now, everybody going out probably as much as anything else, just virtually a systems check is now we look, and I think that's Carlos Munoz, yesterday's winner, that got off in turn number 4. Also, you know, some of the water that was standing here, we have not had now heavy precipitation in the last few hours. Credit to the guys from the Pirelli World Challenge. They went out actually and did a systems check earlier as well, and I think that got some of the water off the track. And, you know, turn 3, like we said, probably the area, at least that was the report where it was the thickest. But the rooster tails are up. We see now Scott Dixon starting to build up a little bit of speed, Mark, and I think now we're going to start seeing people put down some sort of a reasonable time to find out what these cars are capable of.
Anything that puts the impressive abilities and talents of these drivers on display more than a situation like today.
The rooster tails are something to watch. There's no doubt about it. And I think the thing that's interesting, when you talk to drivers in the Verizon IndyCar Series, really any driver that drives in the rain like this, they will tell you that it's not even so much a factor of the grip on the track. as it is trying to see. You want to get obviously up close to the car in front of you in a race situation, but at the same time, that water coming off the car in front of you is coming right there under your visor, and it's not like you've got a windshield wiper on the visor of your helmet. We are looking, I realize it's radio here, but we happen to have the fortune of looking inside the cockpit of Juan Montoya, and that wheel is awfully loose. There are some drivers, Montoya, Sato, those that come to mind, who have a lot of experience in running in wet conditions, and I always find it interesting, Mark, that so many drivers tell you that they love running in the wets. I also think that might be a little bit of a mind game to everybody else.
Nick, we talked to Del Harrigal yesterday from Firestone. Tires not a concern. In fact, a semi full of fresh wets came up from Indianapolis overnight.
Yeah, I was awfully impressed yesterday with the conditions changing all day long and all throughout the race, how well those rain tires held up. I think any mistakes that were made in the rain were simply from drivers probably pushing a little too hard, maybe being a little bit too aggressive. But certainly you can't get it perfect. We're going to see guys sliding around the racetrack all day long, but I think Firestone deserves a tip of the hat. They certainly brought a good rain tire, and certainly the call overnight to bring more rain tires, knowing the situation of what the weather is going to be like today, I think it was a good call. You know, you guys talked about that visibility, and Mark, you would probably know it best from where you're set up in the run down to turn 7 on those opening laps. How many cars can you see when the entire field's coming at you? 1 or 2?
Barely see the one behind the leader, and that's about it, because rooster tails. But it's interesting to note that they just all of a sudden pop into your view, but as the race progresses, they start running maybe a half a groove difference than the car in front of them, just to give them the visibility that they need. And we already see an issue with the 18 car. Is that
is
Rodolfo
on the
rear wing that's popped up a little bit there, maybe from some contact?
That is Rodolfo Gonzalez, who has had an interesting weekend. That's kind of bizarre. I don't know, Mark, if that's necessarily something that could have been caused by damage. I think that's one of the wicker bills on the wing that might not have been attached properly. It's secured in the center, but it is certainly off center. I don't know how much that would. I don't think that would slow the car down too terribly slowly, but certainly that's going to need to be looked at.
If the prognosticators this morning locally, weather-wise, are accurate at all, we expect that perhaps by the time we get 30, 35 laps into the event, maybe earlier than that, things could subside. And then, of course, the challenge becomes, as you suggest, we had issues yesterday, when to come in and get dries, when to come in and get wets, whatever the case may be. I know that worn tires, the slicks are no fun when the grip starts to go away, but I got to believe that's nothing as helpless as the feeling is when you've stayed out on the wets entirely too long, because when you run those things on a dry racetrack, they just don't last more than a lap or two.
And there were a couple drivers yesterday that I know were right there on the edge. Scott Dixon and Will Power. I think we're Scott Dixon and Elio Castroneves, the first two that came in under caution and went to the wet tires, anticipating that second bit of weather to roll into the area. I think we all thought, boy, they timed it perfectly, but there was about a 7 or 8 lap stint where they had to run on those wet tires, and it was relatively dry, and I heard Scott Dixon radio in and say, boy, these tires are going away. Luckily for those two drivers, the rain then came, and they both were able to salvage some pretty good finishes. But you're right, Mark, you don't have a very big window to run on those dry tires or those wet tires when the track is not wet at all.
You and I spent some time at USAC races, short tracks, and watching sprints, midgets, and silver crowns, and we're seeing these cars dance a little bit through those turns.
Boy, it's awfully impressive. In fact, watching Carlos Munoz, James Jakes making their run down to turn number 3. Jakes pulls to the inside to get a little clean air, possibly to improve that visibility. Jakes currently the fastest in this 20-minute session with 6.5 minutes to go. Jakes, Hawksworth, Karam, Hunter-Ray, and Dixon, Mark, your top 5.
You know, Jake, that long straightaway where you tossed to me once we're out on the course for the race later today, I got to believe that as these drivers are tackling this race course, that complex that brings them to you, 4, 5, and 6, they want to be awfully good there, because the next really good passing zone is in front of me in turn 7.
Yeah, and 5 and 6 in particular, I think, offer opportunity, maybe not necessarily to get past anybody, but it's an opportunity where you can throw it away, because in particular turn number 6, when you take that right-hander, it has a tendency to want to push you to the outside. We've seen Carlos Munoz now have 2 different moments in 5 and 6 on his last few laps, able to save it and keep that machine out there on the racetrack for Carlos Munoz. But for the guy who won yesterday, right now, 10th out of 11 on this chart, it seems as though the balance for Munoz is really, in particular, in that 5-6 combo, starting to skip out a little bit to the outside on him.
7.5 minutes into this session, Juan Montoya has gone to the top of the charts. His best lap, 1:38.427. James Jakes still second at 1:38.593. Joseph Newgarden, Carlos Munoz, Ryan Hunter-Reay, your top five. Scott Dixon is sixth at 1:38. Dixon just got bumped down to seventh at 1:38.949. Pagenaud, Hawksworth, Coletti, and Gonzalez rounds out the 11 cars. A reminder, this is not necessarily a knockout scenario. We're not looking at the top six to advance into the next round. It is simply a 20-minute all skate and mark at the end of both sessions. Then we'll determine who's the fastest, who will set the pole, and how these rows will shake down for the race later today.
Jake, of course, a week ago, Juan Montoya wins his second Indianapolis 500 in just 3 starts. We always, between them, all of us do somewhat of a post-mortem after every race weekend. One of the things that you and I discussed, I'm sure you did with Nick as well, this solidifies him as one of the greats of all time, especially when you consider the various disciplines in which he's been very successful.
Mark, I think when you look at Montoya, and you and I talked about this, of the last quarter century at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 2 guys to me that just seemed acclimated to that track that so many drivers say it takes so long to conquer would be Jacques Villeneuve and Juan Montoya. Very similar in terms of their coming in and immediately feeling comfortable. Villeneuve, of course, second and first in his first 2 races. Montoya winning, taking the time off to run another series, coming back and finishing 5th and then first again this year. But to your point, this is a guy in Juan Montoya, who, by the way, right now is the fastest in this session. Montoya at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has run in stock cars and NASCAR, of course. He's run in Indy cars. He's run in Formula One. He's also run in sports cars. He's done the 2-seater ride in MotoGP, obviously not in a competition. But if he were to do so, we can say that he would finish in at least the top 4, because in all of those other disciplines in which he's raced at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Mark, on the road course or the oval, Juan Montoya has finished in the top 4 in all 4 of them.
He's just got to do a balloon race now, and then he's got it all covered.
That's exactly right. Get farther than Tennessee. Yep.
10 minutes remaining in this session. It's a 20-minute session. As Jake just mentioned, Montoya, Nick did too, P1. So apparently, Nick, he's getting his wish yesterday. A little aggravated and frustrated, maybe not realizing the conditions which led to the red, and he's showing he doesn't mind running in the wet.
Yeah, and I've watched the last couple laps. He was following Scott Dixon awfully closely, trying to get around Dixon. Dixon, one of the harder guys to pass, though, in the Verizon IndyCar Series, and Juan Montoya backed off a bit to give himself a little breathing room, but still, in fact, Juan Montoya actually just driving down pit lane. He's currently still at the top of the charts at 1:37.225. The top 5: Montoya, Hunter-Reay, Dixon, Karam, and Stefano Coletti, your top 5. You guys talk about Montoya. He was frustrated yesterday because of the way things shook out to find himself outside of the top 10. It's been an impressive season. He's really, Mark, cemented himself, not just as a guy that can win races. We saw that to open the season at St. Petersburg, and certainly that incredible battle that he had with Will Power last weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but he really looks like a guy that's going to be right there in the championship hunt all season long.
The folks that were associated with CART during his championship run knows how stingy he can be when he gets on a roll, and certainly he's having a very, very solid campaign. Okay, the win by Munoz yesterday, the win this season by Newgarden. Hinchcliffe has a win. Can we now start to say that these guys have quote unquote arrived, that they belong among the consistent contenders like a Ryan Hunter-Reay and a Scott Dixon and a Elio Castroneves? Can we welcome them to that fraternity yet? They don't have the gaudy numbers because they haven't been at it as long, but they are at least consistently running among the front runners.
Yeah, consistently is tough, especially with Munoz, driving a Honda. They're certainly fighting a bit of an uphill battle. Joseph Newgarden, though, has been flat on it every single week. He has been a contender for sure, and that's going to be fun, Mark, especially over the next 3 or 4 years, because it really feels like we're just on the cusp of having a changing of the guard. Guys like Juan Montoya, Elio Castroneves, Tony Kanaan, we're not kicking them out of the door, but certainly I don't think we know how many years they have quite left. And some of these younger drivers that are finding their way to victory lane for the first time this season with 2 new winners, Joseph Newgarden and Carlos Munoz, those are going to be guys that may be able to walk into some of those really good rides.
Jake, the one guy, interestingly enough, that's not part of the conversation in terms of maybe being in the not quite yet to the twilight, but close to the twilight of his career, is Scott Dixon, because it's frightening to think he was 18 years old when he started winning races and championships.
Yeah, and the consistency in which he performs really is still so impressive for Scott Dixon. Dixon right now 6th fastest in this particular session, but he's a guy, the combination between Scott Dixon, the engineering mind of Mike Hull, obviously is one that has become one of the elite tandems here in the Verizon IndyCar Series. Watching Sage Karam out on the track right now. Munoz out on track as well, so too Gonzalez, who is trying to improve on that time. He finds himself right now well off the pace, 11th in this session. It's Munoz, Montoya, Hunter-Reay, Pagenaud, and Karam, the top 5, followed by Dixon and Hawksworth.
Was there a better driver in the month of May that had a worse month than Simon Pagenaud? Just from a luck standpoint. I mean, my goodness.
I mean, he was maybe the guy that I'll walk away with most impressed with, especially the Indy 500, because we knew Will Power had started to figure it out, and obviously we knew that Castroneves, Dixon, Montoya, those guys all knew how to race up front. But Simon Pagenaud, I think that the reason he wasn't able to be really able to close the door on a championship the last couple years, he's right there in position driving for Schmidt-Peterson, was he left a little to be desired on the ovals. And I thought leading as many laps as he did, some of the moves that he made to take the lead in the Indianapolis 500, very impressive. But as he makes his way through turn number 3, he actually jumps to the top of the charts. Munoz bumped down to P2, but it is now Pagenaud at a minute 36.925. Fast in the Grand Prix, fast in the Indianapolis 500, and Mark just flat out didn't have the results.
Do you think the weather's having an effect, Jake? We broke a record yesterday, 116 plus, and right now we're looking at laps of the 136 range.
And I'll tell you what, Scott Dixon is one who just weathered out a scary situation. Went in, I believe it was in turn number 2, between 2 and 3, got really loose, managed to save it at the last second, but he was inches from getting that number 9 machine up into the wall. So Scott Dixon obviously starting to push it now, lay down a better lap, get up there in the area where Pagenaud and Munoz are. Carlos Munoz, another one who has had a couple of different moments, has another one now in turn number 3. That's the area, turn 3, where we've been told the water is the highest, and it seems as though James Jake's now working his way through turn number 3. That is an area where if you're going to lose that back end a little bit, 3 and 4 seems to be the one that is the trickiest at this point.
It's just amazing, Nick, the amount of water that's being thrown up off the back of these race cars, and it's just the ability to massage that throttle in orchestra with the braking system. I mean, it's absolutely impressive to watch these guys and gals do what they do around this soaking wet course.
Yeah, just under 5 minutes to go in this qualifying session, and here's another thing to consider, Mark. Obviously, so much rain, so much water being kicked up by those rear tires, and that water obviously goes 2, 3, 4, 5 feet into the air. We've got 15 to 20 mile per hour winds. Right. So when that starts swirling around, I mean, that's what makes it very interesting. I think that probably has a lot to do with some of the cars bouncing around, sliding around this racetrack. Thankfully, incident-free. We've seen a few drivers test the runoff areas, but nobody has found the wall, which is a very good sign, especially for these teams, because, Mark, yesterday's race was not clean by any measure. There was a lot of pieces of aero kits spread all over the racetrack, a lot of drivers like Tony Kanaan, Graham Rahal, that had some serious damage to their machines, and a lot of these teams would be put behind the 8 ball with any type of damage. 4 minutes to go in this session. Pagenaud, Dixon, Munoz, Montoya, and Hunter-Reay. That was your top 5. Bump everybody down 1 because rookie Sage Karam, Mark, he goes to the top of the charts at a minute 36.452.
Interesting to note the difference in the approach in terms of adjustments and whatnot that you make on race cars. You know, having worked pit road during qualifying sessions, and you can look at timing and scoring, and those blue dots with the P in the middle indicating a car is on pit road, those appear with a lot of frequency and regularity throughout the session. Some guys go out, get those the laps in to do the leak checks, the system checks, then they'll take a wait and see approach, and typically they'll go out as we see a car, that's just what we didn't want to see happen. That's James Jakes, the number 7. Looks like he's made contact in that turn 6 area. The car just busted loose on him. But what we were saying as he comes to a stop, bringing out a red flag condition, they're not making a lot of adjustments here because of the conditions.
No, yeah, you're right. Usually everyone's back to pit lane. You add some front wing. A lot of times you'll switch from the black to red tires, but certainly in this session, everyone is going out there and pushing as hard as they can in the 20-minute session that we have that is now down to just about 2.5 minutes mark, and I'm not sure that James Jake's machine did come to a stop, and I think that might be it for this session, and if that is the case, Sage Karam might have just locked himself a front row starting position here for the second race.
And Jake, we were looking at the replay. He came off of the turn on the approach to 6 at the exit of 5. He was nowhere near the wall, didn't touch anything. The rear end of the car just stepped out on him.
One of those areas at the track, Mark, where there is strictly, yep, that car just skipped around him. Look, there are some bumps there in turn number 5 in particular where all of a sudden that balance can get thrown. I saw it plenty yesterday and plenty on Friday, watching him come out of between 5 and 6, the way that car, once you're fighting that car constantly because of and Davey Hamilton talked about it, just a combination of not only the surface, but in addition to that, the bumps that come out of turn number 5, that balance, you are fighting it the entire time.
And Nick, it looked as though he was hopeful of them getting the onboard starter, getting that car refired and being able to get it back around to pit road, but some pretty heavy suspension damage on that left front.
Yeah, the left front took the majority of the damage. Now, that's not something that can't be fixed relatively quickly in the break, the 4 or 5 hours we have before we go racing later today, but certainly the left front has been towed out, and certainly looked like he caught the left rear as well, bent up some of the left rear wheel guard, so that car's not going to be able to be driven back to pit lane, and as we say that, James Jake's going to hop out of that number 7 machine for Schmidt-Peterson, and he'll get a ride back to the infield.
Yeah, they are popping the front nose wing assembly, what's left of it, off the car, and all in all, James Jake's had a pretty good run yesterday. He's fared pretty well at Detroit here over the past couple of years. Of course, he set out last year, a couple of years ago, indeed he had some success here.
Yeah, had a podium finish here a couple years ago, and certainly he's a guy that's adapted well to racing in the rain. Had another podium finish earlier this year right there with his teammate James Hinchcliffe, a 1-2 finish for Schmidt-Peterson. That was at NOLA Motorsports Park, so this is certainly not the way that he wants to start the day, but as we said, Mark, the clock continues to tick, now down to just 35 seconds. Everyone is on pit lane. James Jake's car sits in the middle of the racetrack. The home Ultra safety crew is there. This session is going to be done, and Sage Karam's time to beat is now going to be a minute 36.452. The good news for Karam, though, is he has now locked himself onto the front row, and the rundown: Sage Karam, Simon Pagenaud, Scott Dixon, Carlos Munoz, Juan Montoya, your top 5. Ryan Hunter-Reay, Jack Hawksworth, Joseph Newgarden, Stefano Coletti, James Jakes, and Rodolfo Gonzalez rounds out the 11 cars.
Jake, it occurs to me as we look at this group, you, of course, having worked Indy Lights the last couple of years for television, joining us this year on IndyCar Radio for the lights, and Nick and I have discussed this before. It appears as though that we've hit on something in terms of a formula in the Mazda Road to Indy, because look at those names: Karam, Munoz, Hawksworth, Newgarden. The formula is proving to be very successful.
No question about it. And you go back and you look at as well guys like Elio Castroneves, Dario Franchitti, guys that ran lights and came through the system kind of before we got away from it a little bit, and now the Mazda Road to Indy designed to bring that exactly back. So to recap, as Nick had mentioned, Sage Karam guaranteed now a front row start. The way it would work is as follows. If Karam's time turns out to be faster than anybody in the second group, he would start on pole. Pagenaud then would be 3rd, Dixon 5th, Munoz 7th, etc. down the line. And of course, if the pole sitter comes from the other group, Karam would start in 2nd, Pagenaud then 4th, Dixon 6th, Munoz 8th. It would become even numbers.
Session number 1 is in the books, about 5 minutes or so until we begin qualifying for group number 2 from the Firestone broadcast booth at Belle Isle in Detroit. I'm Mark Janes along with Nick Yeoman. Jake Query will be back with more on the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
If there's one thing Firestone's learned over its 100 years in racing, it's that if you don't keep moving forward, you're going to get left behind. So even though Firestone has more Indy 500 wins than any other tire on the planet, we're always more concerned with what we've done for you lately. That's why we're constantly trying to make our tires stronger, last longer, and handle better than ever. And we bring that same commitment to every tire we make, whether it's for the racetrack or for the open road. Whatever you drive a Firestone.
Damp, soggy, chilly, windy, all of those things. But I guess the silver lining is the fact that we are qualifying the Verizon IndyCar Series. Race number 2 of the duel in Detroit. And again, as we mentioned in our opening comments, Nick, just a somewhat improbable win. No offense to the abilities of Carlos Munoz, but I don't think you'd go to Vegas with the odds on him winning the race yesterday. But it was somewhat reminiscent of the win that Hinch had earlier this year at New Orleans.
Well, and somewhat reminiscent of, we saw Carlos Huertas pick up an upset win at Houston a year ago. The rain is the great equalizer.
Sure.
And it's not a knock on any of these drivers that win races, but certainly I think a lot of that is taken from the driver's hands, and it's put squarely on the guy on the pit box. And Ziggy Harkis is one of the best in the business, and certainly the way they timed that out, you only lose 20 to 25 seconds when you pit a car under green here at Detroit. So he did a great job, not only Munoz, but Marco Andretti, Simon Pagenaud, of staying out, building that gap on some of those guys that had already gone to the rain tires, pitting and staying out in front of those guys. It was a great call, and certainly a big first win. I know he kind of downplayed it and said that's not the way he wanted to win, but Carlos Munoz is extremely talented, a guy that's been knocking on the door ever since he joined that Andretti Autosport team, and certainly a big win for that organization because, Mark, flat out, Andretti Autosport has not been happy with the performance they've had this season. Marco Andretti's been awfully frustrated. Ryan Hunter-Reay, Jake and I had joked this week, I didn't even know if Ryan Hunter-Reay was in the Indy 500. It was just that type of effort and disappointing month of May that they had. So for those two drivers, Marco and Carlos Munoz, to end up on the podium, that was a big race for Andretti Autosport.
Number 7 is on the hook. That's the wounded machine of James Jakes, and they're taking it by wrecker back to the paddock. And again, it looks like left front suspension damage, and hopefully that will be a relatively easy fix. Rain continues to fall here as we have about a minute until we go racing for session number 2. And again, the combination of the wind and the rain making the conditions less than ideal. But, Jake, we can say that if these are the conditions that we're going to race under, it's ideal for us to be able to get this qualifying session underway and get these teams some laps in these cars under these conditions in which they'll most likely be racing under.
Yeah, how many times have we said it where at the beginning of a weekend we will see a practice session, for example, to practice on Friday, and you think, I don't know that necessarily anything they have here is going to translate because this track is going to be completely different. One of the drivers that I'm really curious to see what happens in this particular session is Tony Kanaan, because I think if you were to talk to Tony Kanaan, he would tell you it's just been a rough go so far here in Detroit. Things just have not gone his way, and now you wonder, does he go out and say, you know what, I'm going for it and trying to put my car up front, or does he say, Lady Luck's not been on my side up here in Detroit, so I'm just going to back off, turn my laps, see where the chips fall, and then let everything unfold in front of me. Knowing Kanaan, knowing this being a place where he has won before, knowing his level of success and his determination, I would guess it's the former, not the latter, and that Kanaan is going to see exactly what he can get out of that number 10 machine. But as they wait now to come out, we will see not only who pushes and who doesn't, but also just how much of that water might have actually come off with those rooster tails as the green flag comes out. Already, most of the cars pulling off, Nick, here in pit lane.
And here is the good news for Sage Karam, who is currently P1 and is guaranteed to start at the front row. Just got a note from one of my fellow Exogen pit reporters, Michael Young, that it is raining a bit harder during this practice session. So, Mark, the conditions for the drivers going out right now doesn't appear to be nearly as good as what we saw just 10 minutes ago.
No, it's not improving, that's for darn sure.
Yeah.
We get a look at Elio Castroneves making his way around the course. I believe that's the aforementioned Tony Kanaan who he has in tow. Tony has kind of taken over the role that Dario Franchitti had with Team Target a couple of years ago. Even though he's in the NTT data machine, it seems like each and every week there's a bit of a different livery on that car. And this weekend, of course, we found out Nick Yeoman is a huge Taylor Swift fan. He was able to quickly identify and confirm that she's on the engine cowling this weekend in celebration of her concert here in Detroit.
I don't know if I'd go as far to say that I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. I'm just a big pop culture, buff, Mark. I know what's going on. Yeah,
we'll let you have that.
Tony Kanaan has Taylor Swift on the side of that car. Big Machine Records, which of course has been associated with open wheel racing for quite a few years now. That's the recording label that Taylor Swift is signed under. So she's got a concert here in Detroit. I think it might have been last night or it's tonight at Ford Field. So certainly that's the reason for that paint scheme or wrap on that race car for Tony Kanaan.
So we learned about Nick's affinity, Jake, for Taylor Swift here in Detroit. Earlier this year, we learned that Michael Young is a big fan of the Twilight series. That was at Long Beach. I guess you and I are just a couple of ordinary guys.
Mark, I'm not going to lie to you. I watch a lot of Party Down South. Whatever.
Mark, you like that biker show where they blow stuff
Country
up,
Music
right?
Channel or one of those I watch it on.
It's not on anymore. Full Throttle Saloon.
Well, that's why.
How could you not like Full
You must have been the only guy watching.
Saloon. No, Ron Green, our good friend Ron Green,
That's right.
is a big fan of Jesse James Dupree. They still do throttle fests around the Midwest. There's one in Chicago, and Ron Green and I hope to make that. But let's get back to the task at hand.
Not really motorcycle weather right now.
No, it's just, well, I don't know. MotoGP's ran into this stuff before. I know because we called it. Look at Takuma Sato holding on for dear life in that 14 machine. Good night. Comes off of the turn and the grip's just gone, and he did a really good job of hanging on to that one. They're all chasing Sage Karam. That time 1:36.4520. Pretty impressive number put up by the rookie.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see if we can find any time because, boy, visibility is just absolutely gone as Elio Castroneves, he's chasing Will Power. He's got Tony Kanaan in tow as they make their way through turn number 6. And, Mark, you can see those hands working on that steering wheel. It's like on ice. These drivers certainly tiptoeing around. We have yet to see really any big times laid out right now, but certainly some of our big hitters like Castroneves and Kanaan as they make their way down that long back straightaway, certainly they're tiptoeing. And, Mark, it doesn't appear it's getting any better.
Now it looks as though the red flag will fly. And again, as Nick so aptly pointed out, when the rain picked up, water started to stand on the race course. It's draining as well as it possibly can, but standing water just doesn't mix well with these cars. And we got a very good look on the monitor at a couple of guys that just simply had no grip. They'll want to gap themselves, Nick, to try to get off a flyer, if you will. That certainly helps the visibility, but that's not always the case. And I don't know that visibility is as much of an issue right now as just the course conditions as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, that shot that you saw of Takuma Sato, I mean, he had that car completely sideways, just hanging on for dear life, and certainly some of the other drivers tiptoeing around as well. So the red flag is out for the conditions. This is going to be interesting to see how this is handled and played out. I would hope we can get these guys back out of the racetrack. If not, I would assume we would go by points, but certainly we'd have to hold tight and figure out what the exact call is because we got half the cars qualified for this race, the other half not even able to get a solid flyer in. And, of course, as we talked about, a 20-minute session here for the second group, and they are guaranteed 5 minutes at least, Jake, of green flag.
The one thing that I'm confused about here is with the conditions, and I don't know, I don't want to speak out of school here, but yesterday the conditions that ended the race were because of lightning in the area. Now, in terms of the conditions here, the first group got an entire session. They were guaranteed 5 minutes in order for it to stick. And I don't know that there's any more precipitation now than there was 30 minutes ago. So I don't know if the conditions themselves are really any worse than the first group just went through. So whether or not that means there's lightning in the area or wind that they find to be undrivable, Mark, I'm not sure what that answer is, but either way, they've red flagged this session.
Yeah, going into it, each group was guaranteed, 5 minutes of time, and what the clock stopped at around 4 minutes, I think, into that session. Nick, I don't think they really got time to even put in 2 full laps. And you could see, as you mentioned, got a good look at the overhead shots and some of the camera shots from above when the drivers were going through the turns. They were gripping those steering wheels kind of like you would if you were trying to keep from breaking an egg. They were handling that wheel so gingerly.
All those cars have been brought back to pit lane. Have yet to see any drivers hop out. Certainly umbrellas over the cockpits of those machines as so many of these drivers just trying to stay dry in those cockpits. Saw a lot of pictures this morning, Mark, on social media. Remember all those crew guys? They were standing down there on pit lane all day yesterday. They had to put those fire suits right back on, so everybody was trying to dry out. The conditions we're dealing with today, the temperature is maybe the most noticeable difference. It's dropped into the high 40s, low 50s today. I've seen pretty good chance we're going to be dealing with showers really until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then if it lets up, it's only a slight chance of that. And then the wind, as we mentioned, 15 to 20 miles per hour really all day long. So a tad miserable for the folks out there on pit lane, but certainly I think we've all got our fingers crossed and maybe we can get qualifying going here once again.
A couple of teams have taken this opportunity with all the cars parked and us under this red flag condition. We saw a couple on the toe strap, Nick. Looks like teams are going to take this opportunity to ran that first session to go ahead and get those cars back in the paddock.
Yeah, might as well begin prepping for the race later today. Of course, we come on the air at 3 o'clock Eastern for the second race at the Duel of Detroit here at Belle Isle. Also getting a good shot, Mark, of some of those sweepers, just trying to push some of that rain away. That's not nearly as big of some of the rain that we saw shoveled away in NOLA, where it looked like they were shoveling snow at times.
Well, there were places on that course where the water didn't stop running across the racetrack the entire race.
And that's why I'm optimistic for today, Mark, because I think all of us, we sat in some covered areas that day, the morning of the race in NOLA, and I think we all said, this ain't happening. We're not going to race today. And sure enough, we got it started. So the forecast is not great. It is what it is, and certainly, Jake, we just kind of wait this out and keep our fingers crossed.
And apparently it is because the conditions are significantly more wet with standing water than they were for the first session because of just the pickup of rain here between session number 1 and session number 2. You can bet that 3.5 minutes in is when they called the red flag, and I would bet that Sage Karam was hoping that last 90 seconds clicked off quickly so that if they said, hey, we gave 5 minutes for everybody to get out there, and therefore that would have been, I assume at that point that would have been an official session, and they would have at that point declared Sage Karam the pole sitter. But now we wait to see exactly what the order will be to start the race here this afternoon.
What is it about these doubleheader weekends? It's kind of bizarre. Tony DeZino from, of course, Motorsports Talk with NBC Sports, he pointed out Houston in 2013, Houston in 2014, Toronto a year ago, and now Detroit. Mark, it seems like whenever we have the task of getting 2 races in, Mother Nature certainly doesn't cooperate very much.
Not very cooperative, that's for sure. Jake, the month of May, especially after the GP of Indy, is that time of the year, the only time of the year, when the focus turns away from the battle for the championship of the Verizon IndyCar Series, and it focuses solely on the points. And it's make or break time, quite frankly. I know it seems like a long haul to August 30th, but I think anyone from 5th on back, if they have a shot at remaining in contention, considering who is above them, guys like Montoya and Power, and with this doubleheader weekend, Munoz's win may have extended the opportunity in the window for a couple of drivers, but boy, you've got Texas, and you've got Toronto, and then you've got some of the ovals coming up, and I think it's time for the battle for that championship to heat back up, and you'll see more of these drivers talking about points than we've heard them make reference to that over the last month.
Well, you even look yesterday, Graham Rahal after the race saying, hey, look, I'm still 5th in points. I mean, there are those that look at the points and just, if you don't have a car that's necessarily a winning car over the course of a weekend, do I have a car that can get me good points? Montoya's put himself in a great position. Will Power's obviously there. You can never rule out Scott Dixon towards the end of the year when things really come together for him typically. So that's the thing that's exciting about this, Mark. A number of different racing disciplines left over the course of the season, and a number of drivers that can take advantage of that.
We are in a compound that it puts us a couple of doors down from race control. The anchor of the IMS Radio Network and IndyCar Radio, Paul Page, walked over to race control Again, they're just a couple of doors down. He just let us know that officials are mulling over their options as we speak, as we see, again, the car of Carlos Munoz that was part of session number 1 being towed back to the paddock. So not a foregone conclusion that this is going to stay red and we'll wrap up qualifying and go by points, but I would imagine that there are a lot of folks involved in that decision, Nick, and there are plenty of variables, not just looking at it from an IndyCar perspective and a points perspective, but also a lot of hand-wringing over what the potential is for this heavy rain to continue.
Track inspection is the term that we heard so much during the month of May during the practices where they throw a yellow. That's the process going on right now. I've seen a couple Homatro safety crew vehicles traversing the course, taking a good look. We also see members of the Homatro safety crew. They're out there with brooms and squeegees and trying to brush away some of the water, especially it looks like down in turn 2, Mark, where you have that hard right-hander in turn 1, and then obviously the drivers love to hug the left-hander into turn 2 along the blue and white curbing. It appears that there is a bit of a dip in that curbing in the racetrack where there is a lot of standing water and some puddles that have formed, and certainly the Homatro safety crew out there trying to clear up some of that water.
All the technology, all the advances, and we're using good old-fashioned $5 push brooms to clear water away.
That's right, and duct tape oftentimes to fix things. It's, hey, they have yet to come up with something better, so.
Sebastian Bourdais, Canan, Castroneves, Power, Sato, Daly, Felipe, Chavez, the drivers that had turned laps in just the first couple of minutes of this 20-minute session. Again, we were 3 minutes in when the decision was made with the increased rain to throw the red flag. That leaves us about 17 minutes remaining. Jake, good to see Connor Daly in that number 5 car. Sorry about the circumstances, and we continue to wish a complete and speedy recovery to James Hinchcliffe, who was discharged from the hospital. Not a lot of folks get pushed out of the hospital on a wheelchair by the defending series champion, Will Power, but Hinch certainly had that luxury when he got dismissed earlier this week.
He did. Send it out on social media, the picture of him. And again, Connor Daly is a guy that I think, Mark, any driver will tell you that there's a balance there. You have to be respectful of the situation in which presents itself for you to get a ride, but at the same time, you have to seize the opportunity when there is a chance out there to fill in for somebody and turn that into an opportunity to show yourself. And in Connor Daly's case, that's what he's trying to do. There had been a couple of names that were thrown around. Justin Wilson was one that I know a lot of people thought might have an opportunity in that 5 car, but Connor Daly, with a relationship going back to the Indianapolis 500 with the team itself, and I think Connor Daly also presented himself very favorably at Long Beach, Mark, when he filled in with Rocky Moran Jr., who had gotten hurt before the race began. Moran was filling in for, I believe it was Draconi, was it not? Or it might have been Carlos Munoz.
I'll be honest with the Dale Coyne situation, Jake. I've almost lost track at this point.
I think it was Carlos Munoz. Wasn't it a quote-unquote business decision, and therefore Rocky Moran filled in then got hurt, and so therefore
Correct.
Connor Daly. But I thought he did a nice job in Long Beach and showed what he's capable of. And I know that there are a lot of people, not only in the Indianapolis area that Connor Daly calls home, but also just fans that have been looking for a while now to see him get his opportunity here in the Verizon IndyCar Series to see if he can't parlay that into next season a full-time ride.
Well, from where I sit in turn 3 for the 500, the biggest cheers go up for Tony Kanaan, Elio Castroneves, Ed Carpenter, and Connor Daly, at least at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, and I know a lot of local fans happy for him. I'm also happy for the fact that the run was so miserable for that engine to expire on the opening lap, for him to get that opportunity. And also, we saw a good shot of Connor Daly's car. The sponsorship of Smithfield that certainly ponied up and came on board for that car. You always feel bad, Mark, for those sponsors to not get that exposure. That sponsor's on the number 5 machine this weekend as well. So I think everyone happy all around for Connor to get a second opportunity. Here's where we stand. The clock has not stopped on this session. It is still ticking with 5.5 minutes to go and only 3 minutes and 1 second of green flag time, and the drivers are guaranteed 5 minutes. So certainly they're going to have to get these machines back out on the racetrack very quickly if they want an opportunity. The red flag time now approaching 12 minutes. Those drivers still sitting in those automobiles, but Mark, really haven't seen any movement on the racetrack. The Homatro safety crew still out there trying to brush some water off the racetrack.
Jake, we talk about sponsorship and activation as it pertains to a race team. I got to imagine the folks at Steak and Shake have to be thrilled with what they got from Graham Rahal and Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing in the month of May.
In the time that I've been doing this job, which would be the 2007 month of May, was when I first came on and was around the series really full-time, Mark. I don't know that I have seen a sponsor activation in response to the target audience and the race audience like I've seen from that of Steak and Shake. Not just the folks at Steak and Shake coming out and getting involved at the racetrack and having fun with it and people wearing a Steak and Shake shirt, but in addition to that, people sending out that after a race they'd gone to Steak and Shake to celebrate a good performance, or it made them suddenly have a craving for a Frisco melt or a milkshake, whatever it might be. It really has, there's no doubt about it, Mark, absolutely resonated, and I think it's put Steak and Shake in a position now where their deal that was not full-time, I think they're contemplating whether or not to go ahead and make that a full-time commitment.
Well, they passed out free shakes in the media center one day, Nick. That always scores with the media anyway.
Yep, that's got my vote. I'm fine with them coming on board, absolutely. Yeah, and the activation, certainly, by that group. That's what you want from – we want companies to get involved and fund the cars so we can build this field and build the sport. But the activation for fans and media types all alike to see it at the racetrack with signage, with giveaways for the fans. You know, I think they had some grid girls down there as well, which who's not a fan of those? Certainly the activation part of the sponsorship is what you really want to see, and I think Steak and Shake's been a nice addition, not just to IndyCar, but certainly for that Ray Hall Letterman organization.
Again, Paul Page is serving as our liaison between here and Race Control, and he informs us that they're still attempting to develop a course that is equal to what Group Number 1 ran on, and so those efforts continue as we continue in a holding pattern. And again, these teams going to get their 5 minutes. That's all there is to it. If not, then we'll probably have to scratch that first session and start on points. Let's talk a little more about sponsorship activation. We've seen a couple over the past few years that kind of dip their toe in the water, Jake. One comes to mind. We just saw it. Luca Filippi and Ed Carpenter's sponsor with the Fuzzy's Ultra Premium Vodka. That's a big one to see where they started and where they are now. One of the longest standing sponsors, ABC Supply with A.J. Foyt Racing, and certainly the title sponsor Verizon. All of those come to mind as those who come here, take a look-see. They realize the advantage, the business-to-business, business-to-consumer opportunities, and they grow their involvement.
Yeah, I think that, and with that, ABC Supply, the second longest, would of course be Target. Target does an interesting strategy, Mark, in the following. We see over the course of the season several different corporations and companies and products that are on the car of either Scott Dixon or Tony Kanaan. Previously, it was the 10 car of Dario Franchitti, where you saw a lot of these, whether it be Suave, whether it be, obviously, we saw it with Coca-Cola. That's all part of the partnership with Target, and essentially what they do is Target decides what products they're going to go ahead and feature in the front of their stores or in some display, and then advise to Chip Ganassi and to the team that's the product that they want to go ahead. So it's a great auxiliary sponsorship for said products based on their relationship with Target. But essentially those products are getting it through Target's commitment and relationship within the Verizon IndyCar Series. So there's a number of different ways to, of course, incorporate your brand, your corporation, and get it out there for people to see on these race cars.
Well, we just received word from Race Control that they're going to make the decision at 12:20. 12:20, they will make the decision whether it's a go or not. That is about 7 minutes from now. And, Nick, let's take this opportunity for folks who might be joining us. We did get the first session underway. Kind of recap for folks how that session went.
Yeah, that first session was relatively green and clean. It was raining for the majority of the session, but nothing like what we saw, the downpour about 5 to 10 minutes ago that red flagged this qualifying session. Sage Karam, the fastest in that first group, so he's really the guy that has the most to lose. If qualifying gets rained out and we go by entrant points, that 8 car is going to be buried in the field. If we're able to get qualifying in, Sage Karam has locked himself on the front row. But it was Karam fastest at a minute 36.452. Simon Pagenaud, if qualifying continues, has locked himself onto the second row after the podium finish yesterday. He was awfully quick at a minute 36.9. Scott Dixon had locked himself into the third row. Carlos Munoz in the fourth row. Juan Montoya in the fifth row. Ryan Hunter-Reay Jack Hawksworth, Joseph Newgarden, Stefano Coletti, James Jakes. Really the only big incident in that session. So a lot of guys sliding around, but James Jakes tagged the wall late in that session to bring out the red flag. He'll start somewhere in the 10th row. Rodolfo Gonzalez, the only other car mark that was in that qualifying session. But it is Sage Karam who I would think has the most to lose at this moment.
And about 5 minutes or so, we should have a decision from race control as to how we're going to proceed with this second qualifying session, or if we will indeed start race number 2 of the duel in Detroit on points. Now, speaking of points, we're all focused on the championship, and we're looking forward to the rest of the season, especially the great places we get to visit and leading all the way up to the season finale at Sonoma. But most of us associated with this series are already anticipating the 100th running of the Indianapolis 500-mile race, which, of course, will be in May of 2016. To prepare us for that each and every week throughout the course of the season, then leading up to the event in May of next year, we have asked the historian of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and a member of this very network, Donald Davidson, to take a look back at the storied history of that facility at 16th and Georgetown. Now we have Donald Davidson's Centennial Moment.
The Indianapolis 500 was almost 25 years old when a prominent trophy was unveiled for the first time, and that was almost 80 years ago. It was in 1936 that the Borg-Warner Trophy made its debut, adorned with a bas-relief sculpture of every Indianapolis 500 winner up to that time. Soon to become one of the most recognized trophies in all of sports, the likeness of the most recent winner was added to it every year thereafter, and by the 1970s, the question began to be heard more often: what will they do when every space is filled? Well, when that finally happened in 1986, the solution was to add a base of similar design. But in 2004, that too became built in capacity, and now there's a new base, this one with enough spaces to carry it up through 2034. As it turns out, 1936 was a historic year for several reasons. The winner was Louis Meyer, the first driver ever to win the 500 for a third time. He was the first winner to be awarded the pace car as a prize. He unknowingly began a much-cherished tradition by choosing to drink milk in Victory Lane, although in fact it was buttermilk. And he was the first new winner of the brand-new Borg-Warner Trophy. This is Donald Davidson with another Centennial Moment. Join us all season long as we look forward to 2016 and the 100th running of the Indianapolis 500. To order your tickets, go to ims.com.
If there's one thing Firestone's learned over its 100 years in racing, it's that if you don't keep moving forward, you're going to get left behind. So even though Firestone has more Indy 500 wins than any other tire on the planet, we're always more concerned with what we've done for you lately. That's why we're constantly trying to make our tires stronger, last longer, and handle better than ever. And we bring that same commitment to every tire we make, whether it's for the racetrack or for the open road. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone.
The duel in Detroit. Oh, Mother Nature. We better not curse her. She provides far more beauty than harm, we think most of the time. That's certainly not been the case this weekend, Nick, and you just have to be patient. We're getting a look right now at some Hardy Race fans, Dad and a couple of kids, and they're bundled up. We can see the wind buffering those raincoats pretty heavily, and quite frankly, those are the folks that you really hope get to see some good racing today. They're so very, very loyal and dedicated.
Yeah, young fans just love a day at the track. They don't really care what the weather is, but certainly, yeah, you hope they get to see some race cars out there. The Homacho safety crew still working, and the majority of the work from the camera angles that we're seeing, Mark, I don't see much work being done anywhere other than right there in that turn 1 and 2 complex, which is at pit exit where the drivers pull onto the racetrack, where it's just puddling towards the inside of the left-hander at turn number 2. So certainly we're hoping to get word. We're anticipating any minute on what the plan is for this session, as half the field has got qualifying times in. The other half really didn't get an opportunity. Everybody went out, did a couple installation laps, were sliding around left and right, and then we got the red flag.
And when you consider how massive this course is, a lot of work has been done over the past couple of years. I mean, remember, a couple of years ago, we had chunks of asphalt flying up, and they have invested so very, very much here locally in this facility and this event. I would love to have the sign and banner concession here. I mean, they're everywhere. The corporate sponsorship here and the support is just unbelievable, and the hundreds of volunteers that they have that are braving these elements. They take good care of us. I mean, the parking lot, pick us up on a golf cart, take us wherever we need to be, and then once we get inside the facility, rides are offered there too. So, it's an orchestrated effort, and it's really, I won't say it saddens me, but it is a little frustrating that they work all year for this, and it would be nice if we would get better weather conditions for these folks.
Yeah, that's the frustrating thing. I mean, with all due respect to, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and Texas, where we're heading next year, those are permanent racetracks. We just kind of come in, we set up like the circus. Certainly it takes a great effort to get everything ready, but certainly for the folks that have to build these racetracks and all the signages and the bridges, so much effort, so much money that has to go into it. You'd like to see them rewarded with some good weather, but boy, sometimes you just can't help it, and the folks at Detroit really kind of been dealt a rough hand so far this week.
Well, our thoughts, you talk about Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denton County, and that area where that racetrack is, our thoughts are with those folks.
Oh,
because,
sure.
I mean, they've had enough rain. I think I saw earlier that they've had enough rain in this month of May to cover the entire state in 8 inches. So that gives you an idea of just how bad the conditions have been all throughout the state of Texas. It's not just in Dallas-Fort Worth, but the long-range forecast, from what we understand, calls for improving conditions there. And we hope that damage is not too heavy and not too severe. And I know that Eddie Gossage and his group will band together and put on a tremendous show there at Texas Motor Speedway like they always do. And speaking of going to Texas from here, I don't think enough credit is given, Jake, to these over-the-wall guys, the crew members, the engineers and whatnot. I mean, you stop and think about what they've been faced with, going from road course configuration to oval, back to road course, back to oval, now back to road course again, and then back to the oval. It's been a lot of work for these guys and gals on these crews.
A lot of work, a lot of figuring out. Of course, with the aero kits, you throw that in, so you have obviously an ongoing learning process about the balance of the cars, trying to figure out from an engineering standpoint. But yeah, in terms of really, you look all the way across the board. The people and the support for the Verizon IndyCar Series, the behind-the-scenes folks, and that includes the behind-the-scenes folks on the teams. I'm not just talking about those who, as Nick, we're talking about, have to put up the signage and put up the configurations, but also those on the team itself, all the way across the board. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of people, and I think one thing that's important to think about, Mark, is the fact that people wouldn't be doing it for the most part. Look, it's a job. It's a way of life. It's a living. But at the same time, most of them you find also have a love for the sport itself and are excited each and every weekend to wonder what we're going to see. What are we going to see this weekend that we'll be talking about a year from now? And obviously, rain isn't necessarily what all of us would want as the answer. But nonetheless, that's what we're going to see today. And it could throw in a curveball to the strategies. And we still have yet to see who it is that's going to be starting on the pole, or are we going to be starting on points? A lot of questions yet still to be answered.
And we hope to get answers to those very, very soon. We just get the word in our ear from race control that appears as though we are indeed, Nick, going to start on points.
And that's, I feel for Sage Caro, because he just had a fantastic run in qualifying and had locked himself on the front row. But sometimes that's how it goes. So if it is based on entrant points, our front row assuming if we're able to go start double file today. Certainly we went single file yesterday. It's going to be Juan Montoya, Will Power up front with that Team Penske. A lot of the guys like Elio Castroneves, Graham Rahal going to have good views at the start of this race, Mark.
And again, there's a level of frustration for you, the fan. We understand that. But bottom line is this. There are people charged with making the decision as to whether or not it is safe to race. And if it is not safe to race, it just will not happen. But again, we expect, according to the local forecasters, they say conditions will improve as this afternoon progresses. And I guess bad news for Sage Karam turns into good news for Juan Montoya.
Yeah, that's a good point. Montoya will start up front. And I think the thing we always have to remember, to have a race, Mark, we have to have race cars. And we just can't risk putting race cars out on the racetrack and tearing them up with the game plan being going green here in just a few hours. So the decision, it's going to be frustrating for some fans, certainly for Sage Karam. I can imagine.
James Jakes.
Yeah, James Jakes. Yeah, he might move up quite a bit as well, and the fact that his crew has to now repair a race car. So it is what it is, though, Mark, and certainly we're going to go green flag racing. And I think the relieving thing for all these drivers, even for Sage Karam, say you had your qualifying effort completely spoiled. What did we see yesterday? There are so many different options of what you can do with the strategy that Carlos Munoz did. He started 20th, I think, yesterday, won himself a race. Marco Andretti was middle pack, ended up in the podium. So just because qualifying is rained out doesn't mean you're out of it. This is a tough place to pass, but strategy can win you a race here, especially in the rain.
Folks behind the scenes who helped mightily today, our Indianapolis studio producer, Chris Pollack, our on-site engineer, Rick Evans, and the network director, Wally Levitt. We also want to thank our anchor, Paul Page, for monitoring race control, and our Exergen pit reporters, Michael Young, Kevin Lee, for their assistance in monitoring race control and passing us the information that we needed. For Jake Query and Nick Yeoman, I'm Mark James. Join us at 3 Eastern. Paul Page, Davey Hamilton, all the rest of us will be here for race number 2 of the duel in Detroit. Juan Montoya will be your pole sitter until 3 o'clock this afternoon. I'm Mark James. So long from the duel in Detroit.
IndyCar Radio on the IMS Radio Network.
A.J. Foyt down the main straightaway. The checkered flag is out. A.J.'s hand in the air. He is the winner. A.J. Foyt at Indianapolis has won his 4th 500-mile race. A.J. Foyt, our winner. The flag will fly now for Tom Sneva and then for Al Unser. We will be talking with all of these drivers in just a moment.
And we await A.J. Foyt along with a host of others, including Tony Holman, who is cheering as loudly as the crowd. We've seen what has never been seen before, beginning with a woman driving in the field in the morning and A.J. finishing 4 up front at Indianapolis. Headed into victory lane now, A.J. Foyt and the gleaming Gilmore 14 Coyote, the Gilmore Racing Team, home, and he wins again.
And there's the check flag for Mark Donahue, winner of the 1972 Indianapolis 500-mile race.
Oh my goodness, we have 7, 8, 10 cars in a pack headed for one Jerry.
Well, you talk about the crowd getting on their feet. They do. So far, so good. They are nose to tail. A little bit of room. There's about an 8-car pack in front of Gary Lee right now.
Yeah, and in that pack, second place and third place. Little Al has gotten around Jack Villeneuve. He's back up to second, and now 2 cars separate second and third. Mr. Excitement is that youngster, that second-generation driver. We're impressed with Jack Villeneuve, but right now he's dropped to third. And there's Al Unser Jr., and then Bobby Rahal. Jack Villeneuve goes on the outside. He goes on. You can't go too wide in the turns. They're doing it today.
They sure are coming through 4. Now they go single file. Maybe they got a little scared last time. Who knows? But going through 4 this time, everybody single. They come toward the main straightaway. Bob Jenkins.
That was just a breathtaking moment.
This is IndyCar Radio on the IMS Radio Network.
This is the tire strategy on a less than perfect weather day at the Raceway at Bell.